I think our schools should be open 12, 13, 14 hours a day. So it's not just lengthening.
So 8 to 8 or something like that?
Yes, and let me tell you what, not just lengthening obviously the school day, but a wide variety of after-school activities. At home we attached healthcare clinics to about 24 of our schools. Where schools truly become the centers of the community, great things happen. So I think we need the schools open much longer hours.
So keep them open 12 hours a day, 12 months a year?
Yes.
12 hours a day, 12 months a year.
And I would go to 6 or 7 days a week, not just Monday through Friday.
7 days a week.
Schools
so the school becomes a center of community life.
Where the school becomes a center of community life, great things are going to happen for those families and great things are going to happen for those children.
Then tell me why that hasn't happened before.
Hey folks, and welcome to another video from aplaintruth.info. I want to do a couple video documentaries on the public education system. This first one being on the history of public education. Most people don't understand or realize why education never gets better. It's not intended to. When you're in power, like the Guggenheims, Morgans, Rockefellers, back from the early 1900s, when they had the robber barons, when they had the railroads and wealth, and they had the real estate wealth, and they had the oil wealth, they created nonprofit organizations, sheltered their income there, and bought up the education system, literally. Smithsonian Institute, National Education Association, they stacked the board with endowments and board members. Started Columbia Teachers University, Rockefeller did. All this with money they made and sheltered through the NGOs. But today I want to get into a little bit, just to start here, where our education system is heading. It's heading towards a computer-based learning, but it's also heading towards a very strong Christian slant with the appointment of Betsy DeVos as Trump's Secretary of Education. Now, she's a billionaire, no education degree, no teaching experience, never put her children in public school, knows nothing about the public education system. She's just very wealthy. And oh yeah, she's related to a guy named Eric Prince, her brother, the founder of Blackwater, the largest private, now academia, or now Z, they keep changing their name, but the largest private mercenary army in the world, and it's a Christian mercenary army, let's make no doubt about it. He's made statements about that. And the DeVos family, here's Eric Prince, Betsy DeVos, they're related to the brother, the father-in-law is married, is the owner of Amway. So that makes that connection. And we also get into the DeVos family, a family of extremists, just to show you what their platform is coming in here. Betsy's husband, Dick DeVos, for instance, has pushed for creationism to be taught in schools. Edgar Prince was Edgar Prince, the father, was founder of the Family Research Council, which argues that homosexuality is a type of perversion. Betsy's mother has shown the same dedication of far-right extremism. The Prince Family Foundation tried to evade lobbying restrictions by reclassifying their lobbying efforts as, quote, prayer warrior networks. What does that sound like, folks? Prayer warriors. Eric Prince is the founder of Blackwater, now Academia, private military company. Prince headed the organization when it infamously massacred 17 Iraqi civilians, and they got off. Attempt to escape blame and litigation, Prince fled the U.S. and resettled in Abu Dhabi. Interesting, huh? Now his sister is running the education system. There's also these accusations. Eric Prince appeared on Breitbart Radio, alleged that Bill and Hillary Clinton laundered money and frequented Sex Island. So did Trump, so did them all. That was home to underage sex slaves. Dick DeVos, Betsy's husband, the heir to Amway fortune. DeVos ran for governor of Michigan on an extremist platform. He pushed for teaching creationism in schools and for a voucher program that allowed parents to send their children to religious schools with taxpayer dollars. You see where this is heading? I have decided to stop taking offense, Betsy DeVos, the new Secretary of Education, said back in 1907, at the suggestion that we're buying influence. Now I simply concede the point. They were right. We do expect something in return. The new Secretary of Education, folks. So why does education never get better? And I'm going to get into the untold history of modern education, but in no other terms, the United States has and continues to get worse in education. We rank below Estonia, Taiwan, Canada, Vietnam, Slovenia, Switzerland, Ireland, Denmark, Belgium, Poland. I mean, we rank worse and we keep getting worse. Now, why does it keep getting worse when we're spending all this money? Well, let's get into the history of education here. And this is from February 15th. This came out just a couple months ago. We're still way behind and getting worse. And Johnny still can't read, but that's by design. They don't want us to get better. They don't want us to get smart. So this is from an article in my Taboo blog I'll put in here. Here's a beautiful Martin Luther King quote on what education should be, what I would recommend you reading. He ends it with, the most dangerous criminal may be the man gifted with reason, but with no morals. That's the United States today. We're amoral. All right, so compared to 40 other modernized countries, the United States ranks 17th in literacy, 17th in math, 21st in science out of 40, according to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. The U.S. has fallen to rank 49th in life expectancy of 120 countries, while maintaining the dubious rank of being the #1 in incarcerations, military spending, childhood obesity, hours of television watched, student debt, and the highest national debt of any country has ever incurred in history. $21 trillion of current debt in the United States, all coming after 2007. And much more massive obligated debt, and no one can tell you even what $1 trillion is. That's how ridiculous it's all gotten. These continual poor performance rankings persist despite spending more on education than any other country, with the exception of Switzerland, who ranks in the top 5 in education. Switzerland's getting bang for their buck. We're getting taken for a ride. They tax our homes to take money for education. And now they bring in a military sister who's bringing in her Christian creationism platform, who's never worked in education. And we're paying for this, folks? Where's the outrage? Currently, only 64% of students who begin college graduate within 6 years. 64%. Those who do graduate have collectively amassed over $1 trillion in long-term, unforgivable student debt. Betsy DeVos has a collection agency that also collects on student debt. Missing payments. It is of no surprise that over 72% of students who have finished college in the past 3 years have moved back in with their parents. 72%. Additionally, young adults between the ages of 18 to 26 also have the highest unemployment rate in this country, putting further strain on middle-class families. The U.S. tops the world in 2010 in spending on education, $860 billion. That's a 30% increase from 2000. This was back in 2010. It's probably close to $1 trillion now. All this increase has come from federal level, while the same period the state and local governments have been relatively flat, between 28 to 29 billion per year. So we've got $750 billion versus 28 to 29 billion for the state. Who's in control here? It's the feds, and we'll get into that. Our school administrators spend copious amounts of time and energies applying for grants, reviewing, comprehending, complying with yearly changes in federal and state codes and regulations, while annually having to pink slip staff each spring, not knowing how much funding will be cut for the school year. They keep them on the ropes, and it's going to get worse. Since 2004, federally directed programs like Bush's No Child Left Behind and President Obama's Race to the Top have married critical public school funding to school average test score performance. Teach to the test. Get the funds if they test. The government's stated goal of these programs is to get a national standardized education performance system in place to set a standard benchmark, as well as to develop a one-size-fits-all nationalized education system, so that if a family relocated to another state, the curriculum and testing would be equalized and consistent. What a bunch of baloney. One mind, one hive mind is what they're trying to do here. By 2010, the national failure rate was over 50%, with the No Child Left with a Mind ranking the worst of 89%, and California towards the lower end at a 26% failure rate. Principals and teachers were put on notice that if the numbers did not come up to benchmark standard, their jobs would be in jeopardy. While public media hails each new presidential educational initiative, over the past years, public schools quietly being foisted with a new business global education product called Common Core. And we'll get into Common Core. It's based in India on the stock exchange. That should tell you something. But it's all getting into the computer-based learning. Over the past 5 years, Core International in India has been the fastest growing company in India, with an amazing annualized 52% growth rate in net income. Why is an Indian education system permeating throughout the United States education? We'll get into that in the Common Core section in the next video doc. So very few have any idea how our modern public education was born, as to who drafted, funded, and designed our current education system and what their stated plans and goals were for the public education. Many feel that given the amount of money, we should be producing a much higher quality students. Yet that was never the intention of the original framers of our educational system, as you can read below. In fact, the system is working exactly as they designed it, probably even better. Quote, this is from first mission statement of J.D. Rockefeller to the General Education Board in 1906. Quote, in our dreams, people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands. The present education conventions of intellectual and character education fade from their minds, and unhampered by tradition, we work our own good will upon a grateful and responsive folk. We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into men of learning, or philosophers, or men of science. We have not to raise up them from authors, educators, poets, and men of letters, great artists, painters, musicians, nor lawyers, doctors, statesmen, politicians, creatures of whom we have ample supply. The task is simple. We will organize children and teach them in a perfect way the things their fathers and mothers are doing in an imperfect way. So J.D. Rockefeller and his oil interest, he amassed over $663 billion in today's dollars. And I was saying here that the Rockefellers, the Guggenheims, the Mellons, the Vanderbilts, Peabodys, they started all these foundations where they created the NGOs. In 1900, there were 21 corporate NGOs, nonprofit organizations, and by 1990, some 50,000 had spawned. This is how they sheltered their wealth, and they used the NGOs to buy up the education system. The newly created social propaganda campaigns they were able to start with all this money was created by the likes of the fathers of propaganda, Walter Lippmann and Edward Bernays. They were able to regularly sell the public at will on the idea that NGOs were solely philanthropic and good for all. In his book PR, Social History of Spin, Stuart Ewan writes, quote, novel strategies of social management and the conviction that a technical elite might be able to engineer social order were becoming attractive. Accompanying a democratic current of social analysis that sought to educate the public at large, another more Kabbalistic tradition of social scientific thought was emerging, one that saw the study of society as a tool by which a technocratic elite could serve the interest of vested power, end quote. The titans of the industry, as the PR men dubbed them, were the top and planned to stay there at the top for generations to come. With such large controlling wealth through the foundations came a resilient web of many useful friends in the political arena and businesses. With connections in banking, Wall Street law firms, media executives, and proprietors along behind the scenes of PR firms, they could ensure any type of publicity and financial backing they wished, including the masking of their true agendas. Through the largest of their foundations that still exist today, the Rockefeller Foundation, Carnegie, Mellon, Vanderbilt, Morgan, and Guggenheim, they colluded to begin the process of designing our current public education system. J.D. Rockefeller, quote, the ability to deal with people is as purchasable a commodity as sugar or coffee, and I will pay more for that ability than for any other under the sun. This was the wealthiest man in the world, even more wealthy than today's Gates and the rest of the guys. So he kickstarted the creation of the General Education Board, the GEB, with $1905, initially $1 million, then increased it to $10 million in 1907. Those were huge numbers back then. Later, he added $32 million through subsequent decades and granted some $7.5 billion. Remember what Betsy DeVos said, influence, but money buys influence. We just admit it. So in 1913, the 62nd Congress created a commission to investigate the role of these newly created NGOs. Here's what they concluded, quote, the domination of men in whose hands the final control of a large part of American industry rests is not limited to their employees, but is being rapidly extended to control the education and social services of the nation. 1913. The giant foundation exercises enormous power through direct use of funds, free of any statutory entanglements, so they can be directed precisely to the levers of a situation. This power, however, is substantially increased by building collateral alliances which insulate it from criticism and scrutiny. So by the 1920s, they assembled a group of 20 promising young academics and took them to London. There they briefed them on what was expected of them when they became professors of American history. That 20 were the nucleus of what was eventually to become the American Historical Association. The Guggenheim Foundation endowed the American Historical Association with $400,000 at that time. This is how they can do the nonprofits. They keep the money, they don't pay the taxes, and they influence. They buy influence. By 1950, the Rockefeller Foundation endowed Columbia Teachers College in New York City, formerly named Russell's Teacher College, that produced 1/3 of all presidents of teacher training institutions and 1/5 of all American public school teachers and 1/4 of all superintendents. One school, folks. J.D. Rockefeller and family additionally funded and founded the University of Chicago, Rockefeller University, which offered only postgraduate and postdoctoral education, the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, Harvard School of Public Health, as well as Rockefeller University Press. They also controlled and continue to maintain ownership control in school textbook companies and scholastic literature copyrights used in public school systems, thus being able to direct the historical narrative used in schools through the Guggenheim's American Historical Society. The Guggenheim's American Historical Society. Additionally, through the use of political favors and influence, as well as structuring of public educational taxes through property ownership, these NGO foundations were able to mold educational policy and control the flow of funds to school districts and community colleges at the federal level. Now, remember when I told you the funding is some $800 billion from the federal level and $80 to $90 billion from the state level. 10 times more influence. This is from David Rockefeller in his memoirs. Quote, for more than a century, ideological extremists at either end of the political spectrum have seized upon well-publicized incidents such as my encounter with Castro to attack the Rockefeller family for an inordinate influence they claim we wield over American political and economic institutions. Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interest of the United States. Characterizing my family and me as, quote, internationalists and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure, one world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty and I'm proud of it. A secret cabal working against the best interest of the United States. David Rockefeller, I stand guilty and I am proud of it. So, in 1936, Rockefeller, Standard Oil, Firestone, General, and Mack Trucks created the fictitious United Cities Motor Transportation Corp., which I just got into in the last video, and you should listen to that. It's very important to understand how long they've been controlling the influence. But this is from John Taylor Gatto, the author of The Underground History of Education. He was 3 times New York Teacher of the Year. Guy has tremendous credibility, and he was spoken out loudly, and I really highly encourage all education people to read his books. He's got several out. Quote, the power of the individual large foundation is enormous. Its various forms of patronage carry with them elements of thought control. It exerts immense influence on the educator, educational process, and educational institutions. It is capable of invisible coercion. It can materially predetermine the development of social and political concepts, academic opinion, thought leadership, and public opinion. The power to influence national policy is amplified tremendously when foundations act in concert. There is such a concentration of foundation power in the United States, operating in education and the social sciences, with a gigantic aggregate of capital and income. This interlock has some of the characteristics of an intellectual cartel. It operates in part through certain intermediary organizations supported by the foundations. It has ramifications in almost every phase of education. So in 1954, a special congressional committee investigated the interlocking web of tax-exempt foundations. It stumbled onto the fact that some of these foundations had embarked on a gigantic project to rewrite American history and incorporate it into new school textbooks. Norman Dodd, the Reese Committee's research director, found in the archives of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace the following statement, quote, the only way to maintain control of the population was to obtain control of the education in the U.S. They realized this was a prodigious task, so they approached the Rockefeller Foundation with the suggestion that they go in tandem, so the portion of education which could be considered domestically orientated would be taken over by the Rockefeller Foundation, and the portion which was orientated to the international matters be taken over by the Carnegie Endowment. One world order was in place back then, folks. Dodd proceeded to show that the Ford Foundation, Rockefeller, Carnegie endowments were using funds excessively on projects at Columbia, Harvard, Chicago University, and University of California in order to enable oligarchical collectivism. Dodd further stated, quote, "The purported deterioration in scholarship and the techniques of teaching which lately has attracted the attention of the American public has been caused primarily by a premature effort to reduce our meager knowledge of social phenomena to a level of an applied science." The Reese Commission also indicated conclusively that the responsibility for economic welfare of the American people had been transferred heavily to the executive branch of the federal government, that a corresponding change in education had taken place from an impetus outside the local community, that this revolution had occurred without violence and with full consent of an overwhelmingly majority of the electorate. Mr. Dodd stated the revolution could not have occurred peacefully or with the consent of the majority unless education in the United States had been prepared in advance to endorse it. So Mr. Dodd also went to state that the foundations had been used to training individuals and serving agencies to render advice to the executive branch, directing education in the United States toward an international viewpoint and discrediting the traditions to which it formerly had been dedicated, to decreasing dependency on education upon the resources of the local community and freeing it from many of the natural safeguards inherent in the American tradition, changing both school and college curricula to the point where they sometimes deny the principles underlying the American way of life, financing experiments designed to determine the most effective means by which education could be pressed into service of a political nature. He also cited a book called Turning of the Tides. All right, so schools were designed by Horace Mann and others to be instruments of scientific management of a mass population. Social engineering, as John Taylor Gatto authors Weapons of Mass Education. The advent of compulsory education in the United States originated out of Prussia, which was within the area of modern Germany today. The Prussian monarchy divided the education system into three groups: those who were to make policy, those who would assist the policy, the engineers, doctors, lawyers, and architects, and the rest would be the common laborers. Using the basic philosophies prescribing the duties of the state, combined with John Locke's view in 1690 that children are a blank slate, and lessons from Rousseau on how to write on the slate, Prussia established a three-tiered educational system that was considered, quote, scientific in nature. 1807, the system was in place by 1819. An important component of the Prussian system was how it defined for the child what was to be learned, what was to be taught, how long to think about it, and when a child was to be allowed to think of something else. This is why we have spells in school. This is also where the Pavlovian bell ringing each hour of the class time comes from, because when the bell rings, you forget what you just learned, and you're going to learn something else. You ring the bell, you forget what you just learned, and you go learn something else. In 1814, Edward Everett was the first American to go to Prussia to get his doctorate in philosophy, or Ph.D. He eventually became governor of Massachusetts. During the next 30 years or so, a line of American dignitaries went to Germany to earn degrees, which was a German invention. Horace Mann, instrumental in the development of educational systems in America, was among them. Those who earned degrees in Germany came back to the United States and staffed all the major universities. In 1850, Massachusetts and New York utilized the Prussian system, as well as promoted the concept that, quote, the state is the father of the children. Horace Mann's sister, Elizabeth Peabody, the Peabody Foundation, saw to it that after the Civil War, the Prussian system was integrated into the conquered South. Most of the compulsory schooling laws designed to implement the system was passed by 1900. By 1900, all the PhDs in the United States were trained in Prussia. This project also meant that one-room schoolhouses had to go. In 1890, Carnegie wrote a series of essays called The Gospel of Wrath. He claimed that a capitalistic free enterprise system was dead in the United States. It was about 1917 that the Great Red Scare was instituted in the U.S. to set up a reactionary movement intended to get the public to accept the idea of compulsory schooling, Prussian compulsory schooling. Problem reaction, solution. The implementation of the German educational nightmare in the United States initially met resistance. Carnegie's hometown in Gary, Indiana, where it was implemented in 1910 to 1916 through the efforts of William Wirt, the school superintendent. No academic endeavor whatsoever. It worked so well in supplying willing workers for the steel mills that it was decided by Carnegie to bring the system to New York City. In 1917, they initiated a program in New York in 12 schools with the objective of enlarging the program to encompass 100 schools and eventually all the schools in New York. William Wirt supervised the transition. Unfortunately for Carnegie, the population of the 12 schools was predominantly composed of Jewish immigrants who innately recognized what was being done and the nature of the new education system. 3 weeks of riots followed. Over 200 Jewish children were thrown in jail. The whole political structure in New York that had tried the scheme were then thrown out of office during the next election. Why doesn't that happen here? Because we're numb and dumbed down. So this is a quote from the National Education Association meeting in 1913. We view with alarm the activity of Carnegie and Rockefeller agencies not in any way responsible to the people in their efforts to control the policies of our state and state educational institutions, to fashion after their conception, to standardize our courses of study, and to surround the institutions with conditions which menace true academic freedom and defeat the primary purpose of democracy as heretofore preserved inviolate in our common schools, normal schools, and universities. Another great influence in how public education would be directed was by John Dewey, known as the father of the progressive education movement, and a great influence with the powerful National Education Association. Dewey's progressive model of active learning or pragmatism promoted a revolt against abstract learning and attempted to make education an effective tool for integrating culture and vocation. He was responsible for developing a philosophical approach to education called experimentalism, which saw education as a basis for democracy. He was to turn public schools into indoctrination centers to develop a socialized population that could adapt to an egalitarian state operated by the intellectual elite. In his book, The Great Technology, Harold Rugg elucidated the grand vision. Quote, 1933. A new public mind is to be created. How? Only by creating tens of millions of individual minds and welding them into a new social mind. Old stereotypes must be broken up and new climates of opinion formed in the neighborhoods of America. Through the schools of the world, we shall disseminate a new conception of government, one that will embrace all the activities of men, one that will postulate the need of scientific control in the interest of all people. The Rockefeller-endowed Lincoln Experimental School at Columbia Teachers College, owned by the Rockefellers, was the testing ground for Harold Rugg's series of textbooks, which moved 5 million copies by 1940 and millions more after that. In his book, Mr. Rugg advanced his theory, quote, education must be used to condition the people to accept social change. Used to condition the people to accept social change. The chief function of schools is to plan the future of society. He advocated that the major task of schools be seen as indoctrinating youth using social science as the core of school curriculum to bring about the desired climate of public opinion. Also, the attitude that educators as groups were vastly superior to a priesthood and to create swiftly a compact body of minority opinion for the scientific reconstruction of our social order. Money for Rigg's 6 textbooks came from the Rockefeller Foundation grants to the Lincoln School. He was paid 2 salaries by the foundation. One as an educational psychologist for Lincoln, the other as a professor of education at Teachers College, and also in addition to salaries for secretarial and research services. The General Education Board provided the funds to produce 3 books, which were then distributed by the National Education Association. So in 1960, UNESCO Convention Against Discrimination was signed in Paris. This convention laid the groundwork for control of American education, both public and private. In 1960, quote, Soviet education programs, foundations, curriculums, and teacher preparation, end quote, was published under the auspices of the U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. Now, why would the U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare publish the Soviet education program? It was the blueprint for the U.S. school to work restructuring that would take place, and we rely on the Pavlovian conditioned reflex theory developed by Dr. B.F. Skinner, the father of behavioral psychology. So Cheryl Thompson-Iserbit, former senior policy advisor in the Office of Educational Research and Improvement in the U.S. Department of Education during the Reagan administration, recited in her really excellent book, The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, a speech that Congressman John Ashbrook delivered before Congress in 1961 entitled, quote, "The Myth of Federal Aid to Education Without Control," quote, "that there was any doubt of the federal bureaucrats' intention in this matter was laid to rest with the discovery of the Health, Education, and Welfare publication, quote, a federal education agency for the future, which was the report of the Office of Education dated April 1st, 1961, April Fool's Day. I feel that its pronouncements are a blueprint for complete domination and direction of our schools from Washington. The publication was not popularly distributed, and there was some difficulty in obtaining a copy. 56 pages of findings contain recommendations to call for more and more federal participation. Between the years of 1967 and 1974, teacher training was covertly revamped through the original foundations created in the 1970s. They were called the, quote, Taxonomy of Educational Objectives, Designing Education for the Future, and a Behavioral Teacher Education Project, and totaled over 3,000 pages. Just highlighting, John Gatto highlights it, is designed for public education for the future, collusion with the Federal Education Department and the presumably independent states. Behavioral Teacher Education Project outlines teacher reforms to be forced on the country, unwilling, of course, after 1967. The impersonal manipulation through schooling of a future America in which few will be able to maintain control over their own opinions. This is mind control. Taxonomy of educational objectives, outcome-based education, mastery learning, outcome-based education. Where did we hear that for recently, right? This is where it all comes from. They plan it long, long in advance. I would be dubious if any parent in the U.S. would send their children to school under these auspices if they were thinking people. In this fashion, children would learn proper attitudes and have their improper attitudes remediated. In all stages of school, manipulations testing would be essential to locate the child's mind on an official continuum. So in 1972, Dr. Chester M. Pierce at Harvard wrote an article entitled, quote, Becoming Planetary Citizens, A Quest for Meaning, in the issue of Child Education. Quote, creative altruism. In the past 40 years, social science experimentation has shown that by age 5, children have a lot of political attitudes. Regardless of economic or social background, almost every kindergartner has a tenacious loyalty to his country and its leaders. This phenomenon is understandable in the psychological terms of loyalty to a strong father figure and the need for security. But a child can enter kindergarten with the same kind of loyalty to the earth as his homeland. In 1980, Schooling for a Global Age, author James Becker, in the preface to Mr. Becker's book, Professor John Goodlad, who has been at the forefront of implementing a global education system, wrote this, quote, Parents and the general public must be reached also. Otherwise, children and youth enrolled in a globally oriented program may find themselves in conflict with values assumed in the home. And then the educational institution frequently comes under scrutiny and must pull back. And then Aaron Russo, a producer and director of movies like The Rose, Trading Places, and Wise Guys, did a documentary that everybody should watch called Freedom to Fascism. He ran for governor of Nevada and got to be friended with one of the Rockefellers, and he opened up to him. The Rockefellers did while they're still buddies, Nick Rockefeller. And this is what Mr. Russo retells in his documentary, that the feminist movement in the 1960s was manufactured so that women would have to enter the workforce and so that more taxes could be collected with women working, thus having to pay taxes. Additionally, children would then have to be put into daycare and preschools where indoctrination could begin at a much earlier age. Children would have to be put into daycare and preschools where indoctrination could begin at a much earlier age. The state could then be seen to the children as part of the family. Talk about mind programming. So in 1998, Representative Bob Schaefer placed in the congressional record an 18-page letter that has become known as the Dear Hillary letter. What it says is the letter is the National Center on Education and Economy, and this letter he lays out a plan to, 1, remold the entire American system into a seamless web that literally extends from cradle to grave. It is the same for everyone and is the same system for everyone, coordinated by a system of labor market boards at the local, state, and federal levels, where curriculum and job matching will be handled by the counselors accessing the integrated computer-based programs. Okay, computer-based programs we're talking about in 1998. Mr. Tucker's ambitious plan was implemented in 3 laws passed by Congress and signed by Clinton in 94 and the Goals 2000 Act, the School to Work Act, and the reauthorized Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Still Johnny can't read. These laws established the following mechanisms to restructure the public schools. 1994. Bypass all elected officials on school boards and in state legislatures by making federal funds flow to the governor as appointees on a workforce development boards. Use a computer database, aka a labor market information system, into which school personnel would scan all information about every child and his family identified by the child's social security number, academic, medical, mental, psychological, behavioral, and interrogations by counselors. The computerized data would be available to the school, the government, and future employees. And who else, folks? Big Brother. So use, quote, national standards and, quote, national testing to cement national control of tests, assessments, school honors and rewards, financial aid, and the certificate of an international mastery, which is designed to replace the high school diploma. Designed in the German system, the Tucker Plan objectives are to train children in specific jobs to serve the workforce and the global economy instead of to educate them so they can make their own life choices. So we see that in action today in the federal government. A recently created private-public partnership with the federal government called the 0 to 3 wants to reach out to children cradle to 3 years of age. On the website of 0 to 3, the organization describes itself as a national nonprofit organization that provides parents, professionals, and policymakers the knowledge and the know-how to nurture early development. Neuroscientists have documented that our earliest days, weeks, and months of life are a period of unparalleled growth when trillions of brain cells connections are made. Research and clinical experience also demonstrate that health and development are directly influenced by the quality of care and experience a child has with his parents or adults. So why do they want to get them from cradle to grave? Well, School Readiness Interactive Birth to 3 is a web-based interactive learning tool to help parents and caregivers support their young child's early learning. You'll find age-based information on how children develop the 4 key skills: language and literacy skills, thinking skills, self-confidence, and self-control, that are critical to later school success, because we rank number 50 and going worse. Also, the Center for American Progress is receiving a doubling of funding from the Obama administration. This was back in, I believe, in 2011. All children ages 3 and 4 should be able to voluntarily attend a full-day public preschool program. Preschool should be free for children from families at or below 200% of the federal poverty line. Children from families above 200% should be charged a sliding tuition copay ranging from about 30% to a cost of 95%. This private-public program is being funded extensively by the Soros Foundation and is necessary because, according to Arnie Duncan, Secretary of Education, the parents will have to be working 2 to 3 jobs in the future to support his family. And in his vision, every public school will soon become the hub of every community that he wants to be open 24/7, 365, where after-school programs are managed by their NGOs and open to 9 p.m. Additionally, he would like to see these hubs of community provide 3 meals a day to children and offer full health care services. This is your nanny state, folks. Already we're seeing the implementation of his visions, where school enforcement programs like the state-mandated vaccinations and the providing of fluoridation pills to children at schools are being carried out, where profits go to the corporate medical industry as costs are socialized to the people. All right, wrapping up piece 1 here. We are creating the most meaningful reform of the education system in a generation, designed to fundamentally transform America's education system. So now, as we enter the quote computer evolution of education, we see a mass coordinated rollout on a global effort to uniform education and mono-minor children through an internet-based education called Common Core, which we're going to get into in the next video doc. But just to give you an idea, these products are being rolled out worldwide and designed and written and implemented by the largest technology companies in the world: Google, Apple, Cisco, Texas Instruments, McGraw-Hill, Scholastic, Pearson, Houghton Mill Harcourt, etc., through the newly created public-private partnerships, just as Obamacare was directed and overseen by Ms. Liz Fowler, who is the Executive VP at WellPoint, the largest HMO in the country. Like the largest foundations, are also involved with the technological transformation of the public schools globally, like the behemoth Gates Foundation with $65 billion, and the rest of these. The NGO lobby groups are also being formed, like the National Governors Association, the Common Core State Standards Organization. They helped establish the curriculum standards for academic criteria. The NGA and the CCSSO also enjoy sole copyrights to Common Core and retain legal rights to any changes to the CC material. See that? They got patent rights on the education system. They're profiting. So the build-out of Common Core is breathtaking as the business end is being implemented by Core International. It's being used in 47 of 50 states, as well as the Commonwealth of Britain, India, Indonesia, Afghanistan, Australia, Belgium, Canada, Chile, China, Germany, El Salvador, Kenya, Japan, Israel, Mexico, and many other countries. This is back from 2014. With a global education plan that reaches children from the cradle through postgraduate school. Now, Core International, like I said, is an India-based company, and here's the description directly from the company's website. Core is a global end-to-end best-of-breed education solutions provider that aims to transform the education spectrum encompassing pre-K, K-12, higher education, and technical career education. Core strives to improve the quality of human capital as well as a global learning ecosystem through innovation in order to produce better educational outcomes. No, it's about to control. They span to go worldwide with this. Aside from referring to our children in their website as human capital, these business models include the hiring and evaluating of teachers and administrators, designing and creating computer-based education, evaluating academic testing and scoring, and the providing of a program known as, quote, secure schools, as well as subcontracting to provide the school healthcare services. We'll get into that more in the next. So I'll put all this in the show notes. That's it for now. We'll do the Common Core computer-based learning, mono-minding our children in the next video doc. This is all I got for now. This is a Plain Truth Out. Thanks for listening. Peace.
I think our schools should be open 12, 13, 14 hours a day. So it's not just lengthening.
So 8 to 8 or something like that?
Yes, and let me tell you what, not just lengthening obviously the school day, but a wide variety of after-school activities. At home we attached healthcare clinics to about 24 of our schools. Where schools truly become the centers of the community, great things happen. So I think we need the schools open much longer hours.
So keep them open 12 hours a day, 12 months a year?
Yes.
12 hours a day, 12 months a year.
And I would go to 6 or 7 days a week, not just Monday through Friday.
7 days a week.
Schools
so the school becomes a center of community life.
Where the school becomes a center of community life, great things are going to happen for those families, and great things are going to happen for those children.
Then tell me why that hasn't happened before.
Hey folks, and welcome to another video from aplaintruth.info. I want to do a couple video documentary. Edgar Prince, the father, was founder of the Family Research Council, which argues that homosexuality is a type of perversion. Betsy's mother has shown the same dedication of far-right extremism. The Prince Family Foundation tried to evade lobbying restrictions by reclassifying their lobbying efforts as, quote, prayer warrior networks. What does that sound like, folks? Prayer warriors. Eric Prince is the founder of Blackwater Now Academia, private military company. Prince headed the organization when it infamously massacred 17 Iraqi civilians, and they got off. Attempt to escape blame and litigation, Prince fled the U.S. and resettled in Abu Dhabi. Interesting, huh? Now his sister is running the education system. There's also these accusations. Eric Prince appeared on Breitbart Radio, alleged that Bill and Hillary Clinton laundered money and frequented Sex Island. So did Trump, so did them all. That was home to underage sex slaves. Dick DeVos, Betsy's husband, the heir to Amway. Now, she's a billionaire, no education degree, no teaching experience, never put her children in public school, knows nothing about the public education system. She's just very wealthy. And oh yeah, she's related to a guy named Eric Prince, her brother, the founder of Blackwater, the largest private, now Academia or now Z, they keep changing their name, but the largest private mercenary army in the world, and it's a Christian mercenary army. Let's make no doubt about it. He's made statements about that. And the DeVos family, here's Eric Prince, Betsy DeVos, they're related to the brother, the father-in-law is married, is the owner of Amway. So that makes that connection. And we also get into the DeVos family, a family of extremists, just to show you what their platform is coming in here. Betsy's husband, Dick DeVos, for instance, has pushed for creationism to be taught in schools. Edgar Prince was found fortune. DeVos ran for governor of Michigan on an extremist platform. He pushed for teaching creationism in schools and for a voucher program that allowed parents to send their children to religious schools with taxpayer dollars. You see where this is heading? I have decided to stop taking offense, Betsy DeVos, the new Secretary of Education, said back in 1907, at the suggestion that we're buying influence. Now I simply concede the point. They were right. We do expect something in return. The new Secretary of Education, folks. So why does education never get better? And I'm going to get into the untold history of modern education, but in no other terms, the United States has and continues to get worse in education. We rank below Estonia, Taiwan, Canada, Vietnam, Slovenia, Switzerland, Ireland, Denmark, Belgium, Poland. I mean, we rank worse and we keep getting worse. Now, why does it go on the public education system? This first one being on the history of public education. Most people don't understand or realize why education never gets better. It's not intended to. When you're in power, like the Guggenheims, Morgans, Rockefellers, back from the early 1900s, when they had the robber barons, when they had the railroads and wealth, and they had the real estate wealth, and they had the oil wealth, they created nonprofit organizations, sheltered their income there, and bought up the education system, literally. Smithsonian Institute, National Education Association, they stacked the board with endowments and board members. Started Columbia Teachers University, Rockefeller did. All this with money they made and sheltered through the NGOs. But today I want to get into a little bit, just to start here, where our education system is heading. It's heading towards a computer-based learning, but it's also heading towards a very strong Christian slant with the appointment of Betsy DeVos as Trump's Secretary of Education.